Welcome in, everybody, to Grind Time, powered by Full Time Fantasy and the FFWC. I'm your host, Billy Muzio. I am joined today by one of my draft partners, Tod Burros, a.k.a. at Best Ball NFL. Tod is a best ball expert. He's the host of the Run to Daylight podcast. He's a high-stakes fantasy football player. And he also had a team make the finals in a national best ball tournament last year, along with myself. And last year, he had a very impressive 30% pass-through in 2022 in best ball. Tod, buddy, it's been too long. How are you doing? Welcome to the show.
Well, I'm doing good, Billy. It's always good to be invited and to be wanted. And if that's not the case, I don't mind filling in last minute.
Yeah, I have been wanting to get you on this show. We've been waiting for best ball to kind of get under wraps. We have some more stuff to talk about. The schedule was just released yesterday. We have had about 24 hours now to analyze the schedule, dissect it, look at it from a best ball perspective. That's what we're going to be focusing on tonight, folks, best ball. So we're going to do the intro, come on back, and as soon as we do, we'll start talking about the fantasy impact of the 2022 NFL schedule and what it means for your best ball rosters. Stick around.
Nothing but time, use it to grind. They huff and they puff it, this bacon is mine. Stakes are all high, your stakes are so dry. I'm as rare as they come, put it all on the line. Losing very doubtful, cause I'm winning every outcome. I'm impressed by his guess, there's no reason to guess. Drafting like I won the lotto, but it's grind every day. Managing teams is just part of the game. Free agents, lineups, they all in one place. This is the content that can't be replaced. Speaking of place, first is the option. Win is the goal and I do it real often. Tournament entries, I already bought them. I bury the field, that's the nail in the coffin. Checking my watch, checking my clock. Grind is the time, I ain't never gonna stop. Digital, analog, never gonna stop. You ain't never gonna stop, I ain't never gonna stop. Checking my watch, checking my clock. Grind is the time, I ain't never gonna stop. Digital, analog, never gonna stop. You ain't never gonna stop, I ain't never gonna stop. Cause it's grind time, let's go.
Oh, grind time, buddy. That's what we do all year long. Grind in best ball during the draft season, grind in the season long. That's what this show is here for. That's what we're about. And let's just hop right into it, okay? NFL schedules released yesterday. What are your first impressions? Anything that was eye-popping to you?
Well, the number one thing that jumped out at me is kind of more of a season-long thing, and that is that there's no buys on week 12, but there's 6 buys on week 14, which makes absolutely no sense to me, and certainly is not good for season-long where, if you're a big season-long player, 6 teams that, not to be there for your final week where the money week, that is a problem. The full-time it is week 14, right?
So FFWC actually is that week 14 is an all week. It's the last week of the regular season.
Oh, wow.
And so they did this last year as well. So you have all week 1 and 2. And then you have all week 14 to keep people interested as well, because you only have to beat half the league to get the win. So there's a lot of playoff spots determined by all week. And if, it's nice not having the money on the line, because now you take the win, top 6, you move into the playoffs, no buys, and you go into the money week with no variance like that.
May I also say, Billy, that your backdrop is looking even better than normal.
I got these little lights back here because it was kind of dark, and I didn't know they changed colors. And I was like, cool, I can change colors. So, I mean, it's pretty awesome. Like, I'm going to show you real quick.
I didn't know you lived in Montana, though.
Oh, no, Bend. I live up in the hills. Why? Oh,
no, right there on that shirt, it says you're from Montana.
What are you talking about?
That shirt right behind you.
The shirt?
Yeah.
Oh, God, Jesus. Yeah, that's the Montana Bobcats, number 16 back there.
Excellent.
So outside of the week 14, where in some contests you're playing, your money, you're playing your playoffs for the money and you have bye weeks. FFWC, you're not. It's regular season. Outside that, anything else that was eye-popping to you?
I mean, we're going to get into some of the important things that we do strategy-wise with the schedule. And in fact, there was a big argument on Twitter. People today that Kevin, I'm going to butcher his name, Majarian or whatever his name is.
Close enough.
I get along with the guy, but he definitely has the most punchable face in fantasy football. And that's saying a lot because Denny Carter is in fantasy football. But Kevin made the proposition that you're wasting your time studying defenses for the last week because defenses change as the season goes along, which, like most good falsehoods, there's a little bit of truth mixed in. But, Billy, you and I, we're grinders. We're constantly looking for an edge. We're not going to look at, all you can do is look at it from where it is. It doesn't stop you from studying anything else, focusing on anything else. And, for those of your listeners who don't know my game theory, one of the big ones is I draft in tiers and I use different criteria for tiebreakers. And why not have all these different bits of information? And, for me, it's a tiebreaker. I'm not going to pick someone I don't like over someone I do like because they've got a great matchup week 17 for a national contest. But if, all things are being equal and I'm choosing between two players, well, yeah, I'm gonna build some teams just to make sure they have good correlations. Week 17, another national chain came out with their tournament today, and there's 960 people in the last round. So if you don't think that on the odd chance I get a team in there, I'm not going to want to have that team as supercharged as possible. I'm not leaving that kind of money on the table.
Yeah, 900. What was it? 962 teams, you said?
Yeah.
So I have to plug this right now since that's a lot of people in the finals. So if you head on over to FFWC right now, folks, you can sign up for our first ever Superflex Bowl Championship. There's only 600 teams in the entire tournament, so your odds of winning are 8 times better at least than some of these other national contests. So if you like those odds, head on over to FWC. You can sign up. You can buy an 18 pack. They're only $50 a piece. 18 pack gets you a free entry into the Vegas Suite VIP party. So that's a pretty cool little perk as well. So only 600 teams. So you're literally facing 2/3 of the finals of another tournament. So that's
I mean, if I lived in a state that was appropriate, I would probably be pretty interested in that.
Yeah, I think you're going to have to come visit Bend for a couple weeks and just draft like crazy, buddy.
That is certainly not out of the realm of possibility, Bill.
Well, let's look at, so schedule was released yesterday, we said. Strengths of schedules have already been determined. How much do you weigh the strength of schedule when you are looking at draft rooms? Does it change for you in season long? Does it change for you in best ball? Or are you not really weighing it as much when you're drafting in best ball? Kind of walk me through your strategy with that.
I mean, what happens? See, I am a connoisseur of fine ADPs, right? So,
do they age like wine too?
No, but when I get them wrong, I do whine. So basically, to me, ADP, if someone was of value before and the field thinks that it's a bad schedule, they're going to drop a little bit and there's still going to be a good value, right?
Yeah.
So again, when I judge what tier a player should be in, I'm considering all the factors, right? Because my number one goal, whether it's best ball or season long, is to get to the playoffs, right? I'm building my teams to get there, right? And I'm not going to forego much of my chance of getting to the playoffs, because you can tweak these teams to the point where they can't get to the playoffs. So, I wish I could give you a clearer answer. So it's a factor, but a smaller one.
Okay. That's understandable. Yeah, I feel the same way. Like it may be something I look at, and I think maybe the answer is, and we'll get to that here in a little bit, but you're looking at more of their like shootout schedule, right? That week 15, 16, 17 versus the entire strength of schedule. Maybe you're hyper focusing on it when the money really matters, and you're saying, hey, what does that shootout schedule look like? And are these three matchups ideal for fantasy purposes? Are they facing what are going to be supposed to be quote unquote weaker defenses, right? Are they supposed to have higher expected fantasy points against these teams? And you look at those matchups in advance. Are you looking that far in when you're looking at strength of schedule, or are you just looking for correlation later on?
Well, again, I let ADP decide for the first 14 weeks, right?
Okay.
And then I am going to definitely build some extra teams based on, because I play to try and take down life-changing money, right? I mean, that's just what I do. I don't want to lose money either. So one of the key things that I'm going to do is I'm going to focus even more on week 17. But one mistake I think I did make is last year, and you and I drafted a lot of teams, and I'd say, well, the Giants and the Bears have a week 17 correlation. The only problem was it was a terrible correlation, right? The chance of that game blowing up was so small that what I'm going to do this year to change that is I'm going to look at each team and I'm going to rank their week 15, week 16, and week 17 schedule. I'm going to favor week 17, but if a team has, like the Giants and the Bears last year in Chicago, in the cold weather, two bad offenses most likely, well, what if, and I don't remember, but what if week 15 the Giants were on the road in a dome, right? Wouldn't it be better to correlate my Giants teams with in a good game week 15 than a bad game week 17? So I think that is another thought that I've added to what I'm already doing. But that was my point I wanted to get across.
So you just touched base on something that I've been exploring more this season than I did last year. I agree with you that I felt like I stacked so much on week 17 that maybe I could have had a few extra teams make it to the finals in these tournaments, where you and I both had one bullet in the finals, and I felt like we probably could have had one or two more in the finals and even maybe one together had we had maybe a little bit more correlation in the earlier weeks to get us through those tougher times into week 17. And so you hit the hammer on the nail. And a team that I want to look at, I hit
the hammer on the nail.
You can also hit the nail on the hammer if you want to, but it's not going to be as powerful.
No.
But so we just talked about.
Can I interrupt for 1 sec?
Yes, definitely.
And it was a point I was going to make a few minutes ago, and so I just want to get it in. Every contest is different. Every site is different. What's the first rule of fantasy football? Know your league scoring, right? Really become an expert at your league scoring. Well, in the same way, the national tournament that we were in last year, there were 4 rounds of playoffs and 3 teams each week advanced, right?
Yep.
Well, that's 25%. Why build a 1% outcome team for a tournament that's 25%? And then the last week, it's a 1 in 12 shot, right?
Correct.
If, what's your tournament this year?
So FFWC, I created this.
You like how I did that?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. So we this is the first ever, and it was scoring weeks 1 through 14. Then you take your season average, you carry it over into playoffs. Week 15, 16, 17 is a 3-week shootout with the top 2 teams from each league. So top 100 make it to the shootout. They do a 3-week shootout for the top points. Add those 3 weeks into your season average, and you have your crown champion. So
in a tournament like that, I'm not worried about week 15, 16, or 17 correlations. I will look at all 3 weeks together.
Correct.
And but it'll even still have a less of a factor to me because a decent amount of teams each week advance. So those are the thoughts that you need to put into it. Whereas, a contest, another, the one we mentioned with 960 teams in the final, I think you got to get, you really need a lot more week 17 correlations.
You have to shoot for the moon there.
If you get a team in there, and again, even that is a simplistic thought for something that could have many layers to it. Once you get to that final week, is all the money up top, or is it spread out pretty good? All that, you have to look at that when you develop a strategy.
Yeah, I agree with you. When you're looking at these huge, massive 900,000, 400,000 people tournaments, you are trying to aim for that 1% because you are trying to take down the top prize. So you are
because you're going to lose money otherwise.
Correct. So you're at this point you're shooting for the moon and you're going 100% upside because it's go big or go home. Where this tournament over to the FFWC, I've been doing 3-week game correlations. I've been looking at teams where I can build 2 or 3 different teams that are going to have correlation in every single week of that shootout. Week 15, 16, and 17. I can get bits and pieces of, 2 or 3 game correlations in each week with these 3 teams. Or maybe I have a 4th team in there with a small stack. But building any type of correlation, this is something that you had really kind of hammered in me last year as we drafted together, was these little mini game correlations and finding, the piece of the puzzle
without the quarterback.
Yeah, and that's fine too. But, finding pieces that you can just have, if that game pops off, having the ability to be a part of that scoring and advance or just get the points and collect them to add to your total. But having a bit of piece in every single week is, I think, a key, and that's going to really separate people who are going to help their pass through in national contests and are really going to keep them at the top of the leaderboard here at the FFWC because they're not just banking on week 17. They're able to kind of collect points as they go. So again, I agree with you.
Let me throw a thought at you that I had while you were talking. I'm more of a spread the exposure type of guy, right? Mm-hmm. Because of the risk of injury. My number one rule of best ball is make great lineups. My number 2 rule is mix up your exposures because the chance of injury over a 17-week season is completely different. A lot of DFS philosophies translate over to these best ball tournaments. But the one big difference is when you play daily fantasy, you pretty much go into the week knowing that everyone is reasonably healthy. There might be a couple guys who are playing through injury, but in general, you're going to pick guys and the expectation is they're not going to get hurt that week. When you draft best ball, let's say you've got in the 5th round 12 guys and you like player A way more than any of the other 11. If you did a projection, which I know Billy does projections and is very good at them, you might have over the course of a season within a tier a 30 to 40 point range, right?
Yep.
That's 1 to 2 points a week in a 17 game season, right? Where if a guy gets hurt in week 2, that could be 15 points a week difference.
Yeah.
So all the more I spread my exposure. Now in a tournament like yours, where it's more of a marathon to the finish line than a Survivor Series, I'm thinking that all the more I would want to mix my exposures so that my teams that got there, I would have different angles. I think I'd be less, in a 600-person tournament final, I think I'm way more interested in having different builds than I would be in a regular tournament.
I think that's a great point. And it kind of leads us to our next discussion, which is creating advantages. Now, that is a way that you can create advantages, but how are you going to use the schedule to create advantages when you're constructing rosters?
Well, I mean, overall strength of schedule, I do believe gets eventually baked into ADP, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, it's something that I can consider. Let's say I was deciding between 2 guys I've got very close right now. are Saquon Barkley and Aaron Jones. I like them both. I like them both about the same. Okay? Well, I now look at week 17 and I see that the Packers play the Vikings, which I've got rated as not a great matchup, slightly under. I look at the Giants and they play the Colts, but at home. Now, if that game was away on the road, I would like that even more because there's a dome in Indianapolis. But there is a slight advantage, I think, in week 17 to Barkley over Aaron Jones. So, where maybe I like them so much that I would own the same of both. Now maybe I would own 55 Barkley and 45 Aaron Jones, right? Just a slight tweak in my overall exposure based on who gives me the best chance to win all the money.
Okay, I like that. How do you think that's helped your pass through in the years? I know 30% pass through is pretty astronomical. How did that? How in the past years, by using that strategy, do you think it's helped your pass through?
Okay, so the thing that I think last year I didn't have any player in that contest you guys were talking about. I didn't have any more than 23% of any player. And, one of those players I had right about that amount of was our buddy Deebo Samuel, who we both loved and thought was a great value.
Deebo.
Even still, I only had 23% of them. But I passed through 60% of my Deebo lineups. All right. I did a very deep study of my teams, my players, and overall pass-through rate, and I came up with a couple key points. Early on, injury is the most deadly thing, right? Calvin Ridley last year had a 4% pass-through, which was the lowest out of anyone. So that was 13% less than average. Right? I mean, 13 percentage points less than average, but more than that, it's 4 times less, right? 17 divided by 4 is 4, yep. Right? Approximately. So what I have found is you can have amazing pass-through rates without having all the injury risk in players in round 4 to 9. In players in round 1 and 2, not only is injury a much bigger factor, but it's much harder to put a difference between what your pass-through rate is and what that player got overall. So the way that I was so successful last year is I was overweight on the right guys in the mid rounds, and I faded the right guys in the mid to late rounds. Way more. I had a lot of really good fades. Guys like Trout, guys that you wouldn't think would win you. But what I'm doing is overall, I'm building. The old saying, "A rising tide raises all boats." I use a combination of my knowledge of players, my knowledge of roster construction, my knowledge of exposure to make it so that I have an advantage going into every one of my leagues over at least 3 to 4 teams. Then I count on, a certain amount of my player picking is going to be right. And that's how I get a good pass-through rate.
Okay, well explained. Jose has a question here. Thank you, Jose, for your loyalty to the show. Friend of the podcast, Jose says, can you explain what a mini build is and give me an example?
Well, you were the one who mentioned mini build, so.
Yeah, so I guess it was more of, this was I think a Justin Herzig concept, and it was game correlation. I call them mini builds, so it's more of that game correlation. Think of playing best ball, but with a DFS mindset, right? Week 16, week 17, whatever you're stacking, right?
It's a correlation.
It's a correlation. So when I say mini builds, you are building a mini team or a mini game stack within your team. So last year, for instance, Todd and I were both very high on Week 17, Kansas City versus Cincinnati Bengals. It ended up being the fireworks show that we anticipated, and we got the points that we were expecting to get from the players that we selected in that correlation. So when you're able to build these mini builds or these game correlations that you're stacking weeks similar to a DFS mindset, you're shooting for, that blow up game when it matters most, when the cash is on the line, in order for you to maximize your fantasy points to, maximize your total payout as well. So that's what we mean by Go ahead.
And the best time to do, and Billy and I would do that right from the beginning of the draft, right? Let's say we were in pick 11 and, Mixon and Tyreek Hill were both there. Well, we knew we had that week 17 correlation. So, Tyreek was going earlier, so we would take Tyreek. But in our mind, we were thinking, boy, I hope we get Joe Mixon because we immediately get that correlation. So, one of the games that everyone is going to be excited about right now is the Bills and the Bengals week 17. That's not my favorite game, but let's talk about it because that's what the field is going to want, right? Well, Stephon Diggs goes at the end, right at the beginning of round 2. And unfortunately, you can't get Jamar Chase, and you'd be reaching too far for T. Higgins there. But if you take Joe Mixon, and let's say you've got Diggs and Tyreek Hill and one or two other wide, Debo is right at that ADP. So if you start and the player that you take is Joe Mixon at pick 11, well, then I'm going to be targeting Steph Diggs instead of Debo or the other guys I mentioned, even though I might have Debo slightly ahead of Diggs, but because of that correlation, this team is going to be a team where I'm looking to build in right from the beginning as much as I can into that Bills stack. I am not a big one of my big fades this year is what's the name of the tight end for the Bills? Knox.
Dawson Knox,
right?
Yes. Yeah.
I think his ADP is too high. Okay.
Yep.
He's going right around the Dallas tight end, Schultz, who I think is in a much better spot this year.
Yep. Much more target share.
I might take Schultz if they're next to each other and I needed a tight end. But in this build where I started with Mixon and Diggs, I would that's where I would, even though I don't like him, I would build a little bit of exposure and take a Dawson Knox share. So that is the concept of mini stacking, mini correlations, and how Billy and I apply them. We're looking right from the beginning as tiebreakers to start building towards that team. It's also going to make us much more likely to want one of the quarterbacks in that game.
And I just want to kind of piggyback off that. When you build this and let's just say that you're drafting 20 teams or 30 teams, or maybe let's just say you're drafting 10,
or 150
or 150, however many you want to draft, right? So don't build it all the same way. Don't grab the Diggs, Mixon, and then come back around and get the Josh Allen, and then come around and get the Dawson Knox. Build it some other times where you're grabbing the different pieces. You're grabbing, the other quarterback. You're grabbing the other running back. You're grabbing the other tight end, right? Make sure that you're mixing and matching that same game stack. You're not just repetitively attacking the same players in the same positions, because what happens if Higgins goes off that week and it's not Jamar Chase? You want to still have, you believe in that game and you believe that game is going to be a difference maker down where it matters most. You want to have pieces to it, and you don't want all the same piece. Just like Todd said, diversifying your exposure, you want to diversify your exposure inside those game stacks that you're building as well. So go through, and I excel this out because a lot of sites will have the ownership, but they're not going to tell you how many mini stacks that you have or how many correlations that you have of each player. So you're going to want to go through and say, hey, I have 5 Buffalo Bills / Bengal stacks through my first 25 drafts or whatever it may be, right? You want to have some sort of knowledge of how many you have built in that aspect so that you're not consistently building the same build or attacking the same game.
Yeah, and I want to add one more thing onto that, which is you don't want every one of your Joe Mixon lineups to have stuff on Diggs, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because, back to my larger point earlier, what if stuff on Diggs gets hurt in preseason? Now, and Mixon, has a great year, but but I've also told you that early on is when you can really F up a team with an injury. You don't want all your Mixon teams to be tied to a guy who might get hurt, right? So, and this is, where on Twitter, people write with those big markers, right? When really building best ball teams is an art that, which is it's fine markings,
brush strokes.
Yeah. And so you want to use these correlations, but you don't want to be a slave to them either.
Beautifully said. Another question from Jose, and then we'll get back to the show sheet here. What do you think is the right amount of players when you want to build a stack? Is there a number to you?
No, because again, I want to stack as much as I can, and I want to correlate as much as I can in every team. Sometimes the draft board just doesn't fall your way. I'm not going to reach. The only time I will reach is if I'll reach for the quarterback to make a stack if I really want that team stack. So if I take CeeDee Lamb in the second round and I want this team to be a Dallas team, I will reach a half round, maybe even a round for Dak Prescott. But but if, let's say, Dak is taken, right? Does that mean I no longer want to stack Cowboys? Not at all. Last year, Mark Andrews in the one national contest, the tight end premium, Mark Andrews was on 11 of the 12 final teams, and only 2 teams had Hollywood Brown. Well, I was one of them. Now, neither one of them had a good week 17, which sucked. But, I love having correlations without the quarterback with guys I think can be difference makers in the first 3 rounds. Let them get you to the last week. And then if that guy fails, one of the old DFS concepts is if player X, who's going to be highly owned, fails, who is most likely in that game to pick up the slack? Okay. So in best ball, that means, last year Kelsey and Kittle had some big weeks in the playoffs. But then who is the guy, I like having a second guy. And if I don't get the quarterback, I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to stress too much about getting the quarterback. Stacking and correlating are tiebreakers for me within tiers. And I want to build as much of them into a lineup as I can because I want as much little advantages at the end that I can possibly have.
I think I'm going to take his question another step forward and say, is there a certain amount of players that you don't want to own? Like you don't want to own more than 4 per team.
I got it now.
Yep.
All right. So the research is, believe it or not, that the best stacks often aren't the number 1 quarterback with the number 1 wide receiver. But more than that, the numbers are really not good if you take the top 3 options from the same team. All right. So,
like Higgins, Chase, and Mixon all in one, right?
Correct. I mean, you can't get them, but let's say you could, right? Well, no.
I got one.
No, it's more about receivers.
Gotcha.
Not about running backs. It's more about receivers, but a pass catching back would count.
Okay.
So you
Mixon, Chase, and Tyler Boyd.
Yeah. No. Chase, Higgins, and Tyler Boyd. You wouldn't want all 3.
That's what I meant. I apologize.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, you could take 2 of the 3, but you don't want all 3 on the same team because, that's just the way the numbers play out. So that's the answer. You can overstack on one team. And I would rather, instead of Tyler Boyd, he goes right around Kenny Golladay. Well, if I've got Barkley, well, then, I would rather have a second stack rather than having this huge stack. I'll add one more caveat. If you're in a 900 team final, a big stack might actually work in the end. Getting there is going to be tough. But in the playoff contests, you do want big team stacks. But in general, I think 3 players, but not in consecutive order, 1, 2, 3, or 2, 3, 4. You want to mix it up like 1 and 3 or 2 and 4.
Perfect. Well, those questions actually answered the next question on our topic list. So let's move on to stacking in terms of the weeks and what our thoughts are in terms of 15, 16, 17. Are there any teams? So you mentioned a bit ago that we think the field is going to be high on the week 17 Bengals and Buffalo game. Which games are you eyeing early? Which games are you straying away from versus the field? Which ones do you like in those final 3 weeks?
I love the Broncos at the Chiefs. And it's much more accessible game than the Bills at the Bengals. I think that game has great blow-up potential. That's my favorite week. And if it's not going to be everyone else's week favorite, it's going to be mine. The other one that I like besides the one mentioned was I like the Rams and the Chargers. I think that's a game that could be pretty high scoring. And the sneaky two, the 2 sneaky ones, my favorite sneaky one is the Bears going into Detroit to play the Lions.
Yes. You should see some of the teams I've been building with this stack already. I'm in love with them.
It's such a cheap set. And what's great is that we haven't even gone into there's your primary stack and your secondary stack.
Yep.
And there's a whole lot of strategy around that, but it doesn't tie into bye weeks and what we're talking about today. But I really, what are we looking for in week 17? We're looking for good weather.
Yep.
We're looking for bad defenses.
Yep.
And we're looking for domes. And that's a game that has a dome with what could be bad defenses. And the other thing we want is cheap stacks. I mean, you could build a Bears-Lions stack into almost any team that you build. You could mix up all your primary stacks, have a good amount of Bills, a good amount of Chiefs, good amount of Broncos, good amount of Rams, good amount of Chargers, all mixed in with these really cheap teams.
And then stack them in these double-digit rounds.
The other game that I really like that I think is going to be sneaky is the Jaguars at the Texans. I think that, again, that could be 2 bad defenses. I don't like it nearly as much, but I think that's interesting. And I do think I'm a big fan of the Giants this year. I have been so down on the Giants for so long.
They've broken your heart.
Well, I'm a Giant fan, and I hated Gettleman with the passion that was bad. And and every weapon, you can get Barkley in the 3rd round. I mean, let's think about this. Barkley was going like 1-6, 1-7 this time last year, coming off an ACL with no offensive line, and Jason Garrett as his offensive coordinator.
Yep, exactly.
So now he's going early 3rd round with a vastly improved offensive line. Brian Daboll, very creative.
And no competition.
Nobody backing him up of note. I mean, so you take Barkley in the 3rd, and then you could pick either Tony or Golladay and grab Daniel Jones. I mean, that I would have liked to have seen a little bit better of a week 17 correlation because the Colts have a good defense. But other than that, I'm a big Giants guy this year.
But you just mentioned, so this is where I go back to earlier, and I talked about building 2 or 3, maybe 4 team games stacks that all have the 3-week shootout correlation. So this is more of like a correlation times 3, right? You mentioned the Jaguars. You mentioned Detroit, right? You look at some of these guys' schedules, and yeah, the Giants aren't there, but like another team is like the Jets, right? They're going to have a correlation against Detroit. They're going to have a correlation against the Jaguars. You mentioned you like the Jaguars versus the Texans. You mentioned you like Chicago versus the Lions. So you can find these correlations where they're going to stack upon weeks and get you pass through to each week as long as those games are hitting. Again, we're talking about, you know, an upper tier of outcomes to happen, but if it all lines up perfectly, you're setting yourself up for a massive payday.
Well, and also back to the contest for your site, the ffwc.com. Go and what, Billy? What's your code?
No code. I'll put the links down inside the show notes once we're done, so you can join if you have not signed up.
But here's listen to this. What do you think about a final 3 weeks of Detroit at home, Jaguars at home, and at Seahawks?
Yep,
you think that you'd be? Yeah, that's the Jets.
Yep.
The Jets are also cheap.
Yeah.
And for a 3 week, you know, like for season long or for the FFWC's best ball tournament, I think the Jets are a fabulous option.
Yeah, that's what I've been talking about, these game stacks. I've been building like these, like since the schedule came out yesterday, I did this Jets, Detroit, Chicago stack, because a lot of these pieces can be had very cheap. And then you can target, like you said, some of these upper echelon players earlier, and then you can get these really cheap stacks late that are going to have a lot of correlation. And that's how I've been attacking it since the schedule came out. Of course, it's going to, you know, rotate weekly because we're trying to build diversity here within our builds. So, but just something to consider for all the folks who are watching. Let's take, so we've briefly touched base on it, but let's talk about bye weeks and how do they play into your roster construction. Will you skip a player if you have too many with the same bye week? Will you drop a tier to avoid it? Do you make exceptions? Walk me through your philosophy here with bye weeks.
Well, in general, it depends on the position group, right? So running backs typically in a 18, how many roster spots in your tournament?
So you're starting 1 quarterback, 2 running back, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, no tight end premium, 1 flex spot that is running back, wide receiver, or tight end, and then 1 super flex spot.
And how many total rounds?
20 rounds.
20 rounds. All right. So in a 20-round tournament, I'm going to have 5 or 6 running backs. I wouldn't want more than 2 of those weeks to have the same bye, right? For me to add a third running back with the same bye, which means I'm going to take a dip in a certain week, I'm going to definitely take a dip that week. The chances of my other 2 running backs putting up scores that are competitive is probably small. For me to take that third bye week, I would really have to have a great value on the board, right? If a running back who dropped 2 rounds had the same third bye week as 2 of my other running backs, I'd still take them.
So let's just I just want to kind of piggyback off this while we're here. You're on the board. The value's there. You're like, man, I just can't pass on this guy. He's a tier above everyone else on the board. I already have 3 with the same buy already. Do you say fuck it and do you lean into it and just say I'm taking the L this week. I'm going to take a dip?
Here's the question I ask myself, Billy. Here's the question I ask myself. Am I going to score more points by taking this person than I'm going to give up by having the bye week issue?
And the answer is probably yes.
All right. So let's say I'm going to give up 10 points because of the bye week issue. If I think that guy is going to get me 15 points over any of the other running backs that I would take here, or any other position that I would take, he's that good of a value. Well, then, yeah, so that's the thought that you want to ask yourself is, am I, because that's what we're ultimately trying to do is score the most points.
Yeah.
Right. So think of what you're losing and what you're gaining, and then make the choice that's going to give you the best chance of winning.
It's analytical, is what you're saying.
Correct.
All right. So let's move on. Give me 3 players who have moved up your board from yesterday with the release of the schedule.
I didn't put enough thought into that. Well, you
can give me 2.
One guy that I thought was just a fabulous value all off season, and then Jerry Jeudy got arrested. Tim Patrick is a guy now that he also has this correlation with the Chiefs week 17. Tim Patrick is a guy I would put on that list. He's a guy that I don't mind drafting like 2 rounds ahead of his ADP right now, because I think A, he's going to pay it off, and B, by the time we get to August, I don't think he's going to be around 14 or 15 pick. I think he's going to be around 10 to 12 pick. So that's one guy. I'll give you someone who is, I think all the Packers have taken a hit. The Packers play the Rams, the Dolphins, and the Vikings. Those are some pretty good defenses.
Yeah.
So I would say that Aaron Jones, who I loved, has taken a little bit of a hit. Let's see. I think Tyreek Hill takes another hit because of playing the Pats in week 17. What's Bill Belichick good at? He's good at scheming away a team's best weapons. I think Jalen Waddle takes a little bit of a hit because, I could see a situation where that helps Chase Edmonds or Mostert, who I stack cuffed together today in a contest because they're so cheap, and the odds are one of them is going to be a 10-point a week guy. I don't mind drafting them together. I digress though. And the last one that I think has gone up is David. 2 guys. David Montgomery. I've not been a David Montgomery guy, but he's got that week 17 matchup against the Lions. They're not good against the run. And the other one is the Ravens play the Steelers the last week. And if you remember, the Steelers' run defense was like Swiss cheese last year. And people don't think of the Steelers as a bad defense, but their secondary is not bad. So I think Mark Andrews and Bateman take a little bit of a hit, but J.K. Dobbins, late 4th, early 5th round, with all his talent, people seem to not like him this year. I think the schedule has made me more interested in J.K. Dobbins.
Okay, all good names. I'll throw a couple out there. For me, it's pretty much anyone on the Jets. Like, the schedule is great, the shootout's great, and in particular, it's going to be Carter. Everyone's looking at the shiny new toy, looking at Breece Hall. I'm questioned that you have an unquestioned number 2 in this offense. He's probably going to be heavily involved in the pass game. This team is probably going to be playing from behind a bit this season, and you have a pretty easy shootout schedule. We talked about injuries, always a concern with running backs, and you have, this fantastic shootout schedule, and he has slipped so much in ADP. He's going around 12 in some drafts, 11, 13 I've seen, to be able to pick up that value. The other one I really like, and you mentioned it earlier, and I already was high on this stack in general, was just Chicago Bears. The Darnell Mooneys, the Cole Kmets. I mean, you look at their overall strength of schedule, which is not horrible. What was it? I think it was 24th. So you're talking like bottom 8, 9 in the league in terms of strength. It's pretty darn easy. And then they get to face the final 2 weeks. They get to face the Bills, which I expect for them to get in a shootout, or at least play catch up against the Bills and have a lot of opportunity in the passing game. And then we talked about the Lions game already, right? You have 2 teams that we expect to have bad offenses that I get to face up in the final week. So a lot of these players out there, the Mooneys, the Kmets, the Swifts, for crying out loud.
I wasn't on Swift as much. And you know I loved him last year.
Yep.
But I only have about 3% of him this year, and I think this changes that dynamic. And a guy
100%.
who's cheap as hell is Jamal Williams. I mean, people were drafting Jamal Williams in the 11th, 12th round last year, and he's a guy whose role hasn't changed. And now you can get him at 17th, 18th round.
Yeah, I haven't drafted much of him at all. It seems to be I'm usually focusing something
because
else.
he's not exciting.
No, he's not exciting, but it's also the way I've been constructing rosters lately. It's like I seem to be attacking like tight ends at that time, pretty heavily.
Too.
Well, Todd, it's been a pleasure to have you on as always. Why don't you tell the listeners where to find you and where they can find your podcast?
Well, at Best Ball NFL, I've just been doing live streams lately. I'll be doing a bunch of live drafts coming up where I'll be inviting people to come play with me. And, Billy, I always look forward to being with you and spending time with you and in Montana.
The Montana Bobcat jersey in the back. Just a reminder to everybody, we are constantly filling up drafts at the FFWC Daily. We have the online championship that you can reserve your 3-packs. You have the World Championship where you can reserve your tickets as well. Discounts are available as your loyalty increases with your amount of teams. And we're going to be drafting in Vegas this year at the MGM. We're going to be drafting at Topgolf as well for the 10K leagues and the 5K leagues. So make sure to get your teams. Like I said, if you buy an 18-pack of the Best Ball Superflex Bowl leagues, 18-pack, only $900, you get free entry, VIP entry into the VIP party in the suite in Vegas. That's a pretty sweet perk. I know about you, but I can probably drink my way pretty close to my buy-ins back in. So I think that's something you can hang your hat on.
You and your therapist need to talk about that. Or your wife.
I think you're my football therapist, you and Hubbard.
Yeah, that's true. we all keep each other on the straight and narrow.
Yeah. Well, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Have a good night. We'll see you all back here next week.
Nothing but time, use it to grind. They huff and they puff it, this bacon is mine. Stakes are all high, your stakes are so dry. I'm as rare as they come, put it all on the line. Losing very doubtful, cause I'm winning every outcome. I'm impressed by his guess, there's no reason to guess. Drafting like I won the lotto, but it's grind every day. Managing teams is just part of the game. Free agents, lineups, they all in one place. This is the content that can't be replaced. Speaking of place, first is the option. Win is the goal and I do it real often. Tournament entries, I already bought them. I bury the field, that's the nail in the coffin. Checking my watch, checking my clock. Grind is the time, I ain't never gonna stop. Digital, analog, never gonna stop. You ain't never gonna stop, I ain't never gonna stop. Checking my watch, checking my clock. Grind is the time, I ain't never gonna stop. Digital, analog, never gonna stop. You ain't never gonna stop, I ain't never gonna stop. Cause it's grind time, let's go.